Hello and welcome to the Startups of London podcast. I'm your host Ozan and the founder of Startups of London. Today I'm joined by Richard Mabey, founder and CEO of Juro. Juro is an all-in-one contract automation platform for legal teams to manage their contracts in one unified workspace. That's what I see from the description anyways. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. So, tell us about Juro in a few words. What does it do? Well, who does it help? And tell us your story that brought you to being here today.
Yeah, awesome. So I very unusual background for a founder in that I started my career as a corporate lawyer. So essentially, that job is really all about working with legal contracts. And for me, a lot of that work was super interesting. I think the law is a particularly interesting subject, but a large amount of my life was actually more around process. So you can think about things when we agree legal contracts, like creating them in Microsoft Word and redlining them and going through track changes, saving them to PDFs. Back when I was a lawyer, we printed stuff. We now have things like DocuSign to sign documents. But I was pretty frustrated by just how time-consuming that process was. And the more I learned about legal contracts, the more I realized that we could bring documentation into the browser and have not only an editor that's browser native, but an end-to-end workflow from creating documents all the way through to getting them executed, approved, negotiated, and then managed post-signature. So now we're an all-in-one contract automation platform, and we generally work with companies that process really large numbers of legal contracts. So you can see on our website, like Deliveroo and Kazoo and The Real and AngelList, all use Juro to go and agree and manage contracts at scale.
Brilliant. So you've reached a certain scale, which I feel, in my experience and the conversations I've had with founders, it kind of changes things. But it depends on the business how that change happens. So let's talk about for a few seconds funding story of Juro. Like, was it bootstrapped? Was it self-funded? Did it go through an accelerator or an incubator to start with? What kind of investment you received? With the idea that we are trying to discover how different funding styles kind of affect or change the DNA of the business. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Totally. I think when we started, I didn't really know anything about funding. But the initial hypothesis was that we were going to just bootstrap it and somehow make it work. I think what I realized, building a SaaS platform is the amount of engineering that you need to get to the product to a kind of a minimum sellable, minimum lovable state is quite heavy. So although, among me and my co-founder, we were kind of actually building the product and doing some coding. We needed people and fast. So we decided to be equity funded, and that started with the Seed Camp Accelerator. So it was at that point an accelerator, and we managed to persuade them, via a kind of contest. I think there was sort of 5,000 pitches or something, and they awarded 5 investments or something like that. It was kind of crazy numbers. But, and the odds are always stacked against you. But Reshma Sahoni at Seed Camp, the founder of Seed Camp, saw something in the idea and, gave us what seemed like an incredibly large amount of money, which was 70,000 euros at the time. And that just enabled us to hire a few folks. And
that's before inflation, I must add.
Yes, exactly. So this was in 2016. And then, quite soon after that, we got our first customers and started seeing traction. And so we did an angel round, and that was with Michael Pennington, who's the founder of Gumtree, Paul Forster, who's co-founder of Indeed.com, Tarvet and Henricus of TransferWise, a couple of our customers, which was really, really cool, who, were using Juro and wanted to invest. I think it was 550K, I think was that round. And then we did a seed round, which was led by Point Nine Capital, Christoph Jantz, Rodrigo Martinez in 2018. And then, it took us a little time to get to good levels of product market fit and the kind of the scaling phase, which we hit, sort of early 2020, when we raised a Series A from Union Square Ventures. And by that point, we were growing pretty fast. We then, of course, had kind of COVID, and we can talk about that. That took us with the most recent round, which was the January of this year, which was led by 8 Roads, Alston Zetcher at 8 Roads, which was $23 million. So we've kind of been through a couple of these VC financing rounds.
How does it change the company? How does it change the way that you perhaps view and approach the business and your role within the business?
Well, it changes in lots of ways. I think one of the curious things is I think it really depends what kind of VCs you have, right? So we spent a lot of time doubling down on finding the right people. It took longer, right? We could have probably moved faster and gone with less good funds, but we really diligenced who we wanted to work with. So we were taking references on the partners at these companies, saying you're a portfolio company, how's it been? Tell us all the bad stuff. And the end result of that work is we've got a board together that I think is really good and incredibly smart and helpful and positive. So that's been very helpful. You hear lots of horror stories from founders where the VCs are make them do all this kind of weird stuff. we haven't had that, but I think especially in the last round, Series B, you're raising really growth capital at this stage. So. Yeah. The trick is to invest the capital in a way that gives strong return on that capital to the trajectory of the company. And, that it does become more complex over time, and it becomes a slightly different game from, trying to find just a few customers to making everything repeatable.
Yeah. I was taking a look at your LinkedIn profile, and something jumped at me. You said scale-up CEO. It made me think of this question to approach it from a different angle. Do you think companies need different types of CEOs at different stages?
Yes, I mean they do, and that can be the same person or it can be different people. So I was actually speaking
with a different approach and different mentality, perhaps. But still, you need. I don't know. I think this is a very fascinating question, especially for entrepreneurs out there who are mostly in the earlier stages of their businesses, but they have no idea what's coming to them. So. Let us know what your experience was with this.
Totally. I think that's absolutely right. And it's kind of a scary thing, right? Because to get anywhere in a startup is really just incredibly hard, right? If you get even close to product market fit, you've done, something very impactful. And in the early days, it's very scrappy. There's no structure. You're just kind of doing a lot of experimentation and growth hacking. And then all of a sudden, you start growing up, and we've hired like 40 people this year alone. So the company changes quite dramatically. And what becomes more important is very clear communication, building around company values, structures, incentives. Microsoft Excel appears a lot more than it used to, and you need a completely different skill set, right? So I feel as a CEO, that I'm lucky to work in the way I do. I love my job, but I'm constantly trying to adapt to those circumstances a little bit ahead of our growth. So, part of that has been, I've gone and got an exec coach who's been fantastic and helpful with it, but it's also about just upskilling yourself, right? So my coach has this great model, which is there's sort of three types of CEOs. There's the visionary evangelist, right? So this is the sort of, crazy person who comes up with these creative ideas. You got the manager of relationships, which is someone who's, actually able to build a team and keep the team coherent and successful. And then you have the manager of execution, which is like sort of, Captain OKR, right? This is the very structured manager person. And, most entrepreneurs score very highly as a visionary, but actually really suck at, structured management because, of course, they, like most people, have never done it. Mm-hmm. So it's a really steep learning curve. And I think, I'm always very realistic that I feel that I've scaled there, but, I think every CEO needs to ask themselves that question from time to time, which is, am I the right person to ensure our mission is successful at this stage of growth? Many CEOs hold on too long and they don't realize, a couple of years failing through things that they can't do it. And some CEOs are, afraid to try, and end up, relinquishing control to someone else too early. So I think there's pitfalls there, but I've certainly found it really, really fascinating learning experience over the last, year or so as the company's dramatically changed.
I mean, Richard, kudos to you, because I think that openness to learning is perhaps the thing that we skip over, but it's, I think, the most important thing that kind of structures your attitude towards this situation, because you could have been in a conversation where you're not saying these things, but you're saying SEO is either born or made or something like that. I think that mentality of being open to learning is absolutely key, and it's the starting point for your approach to this, which I really do admire, to be honest. But I think that should also have a beginning as well, right? Was there a moment when you were building this company with a lot of very talented people around you, I'm sure? Was there a moment where you said, you know what? This is actually beyond my current skills and I need to grow myself. And if such things happened, can you give us an example, perhaps, if you have?
Yeah, it happens all the time. I think like one huge focus for me at the moment is on executive hiring, right? So the way I kind of have modeled hiring is start by doing everything myself. So, I made myself sell the first, I think it was like 500,000 in revenue, myself. And I'm not naturally a salesperson. I had to kind of learn it. And, I enjoyed learning. You got to a point where, I thought, well, actually, I think we know how to sell this product now. So I hired a couple of sales reps, tried to coach them, train them in what to do. And then, got to a point where that was sort of working. We said, well, we need to go and, hire a great sales leader. So we hired James, who's, our VP of sales now. And I think that's just acknowledging as a founder that you need to get the balance right between, you need to ask the right questions and understand what you need, but also you don't want to scale it too far because, I'm never going to be a great VP of sales. And it's been the same thing with, other functions. We've recently hired a CTO, Mark, and again, as founders, we sort of get to a point where we can't, manage during the scale up phase in the way that a really experienced and exceptional executive could. So I think sort of just knowing the right balance there and knowing when it's time is important, and also just being really honest about it. And the thing that surprises me time and time again is actually how much the team appreciates the honesty and the vulnerability and the transparency, where a leader says, I'm kind of struggling in this, we need to do something else. I think people appreciate that much more than, founders who smooth everything over and sort of pretend everything is great.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with the last point. I've personally worked with different people from different walks of life, and I can even think of the names and the faces when you say the last thing, because there are a lot of leaders in many organizations who will understand the question but act as if they have not entirely understood the question, or they will simplify. Like, there's a very complex situation. It's just like when you're at school, the teacher teaches you the very simple formula and like a very basic problem, and then you solve it, and in the test you get an incredibly complex question that you're not very equipped to answer, right? That's kind of how it happens, I think, in organizations that are not transparent to this degree. In reality, it's much more complex. They understand it's complex, but they give you still the boilerplate answer and so on. And these very little, seemingly insignificant things, I think, erode trust in the organization to a certain degree, and then kind of signal, oh, okay, this is how we do things around here. And everybody then starts to have a map, a visual, almost internal representation of what to do versus what not to do within an organization. And I'm sure that's the case with Juro as well. So maybe with that in mind, tell us about like the work culture you have. What is considered an okay behavior in there? What is not? And how do you deal with feedback? Do you ask for it? Do you give people feedback?
So I think it's a really important question. I mean, we sometimes think about Juro as like two products. Like the one product is the thing we sell, right? So contract automation platform. The other product is the company itself as a place that people want to go to work. So, I think one thing was really, important to me starting the company is we design the company like a product, right? With employees as the users of the product. And we want to give them an amazing experience and the right structures and processes to allow them to have great impacts and learning and find purpose at work. That's just something that's personally been really important to me because I think a hell of a lot of people wake up in the morning, go over to their desk or go into a physical hub and just, really are not happy to be there. A huge number of people in the world, and we just spend too much time at work for that to be the case. So yeah, we did a few things. Like starting in the early days, we built values and related behaviors, documented them quite early. So I think we did that when we were about 10 people, I want to say. And that was like a super useful exercise. It's one of these funny things where there's not enough people in the company really, almost to need it. But we went through the exercise and we kind of ran some workshops with the team. And we really spent a lot of time thinking about what values and behaviors do we have today that are good? So not kind of aspirationally, what do we want to be, but like what in this group of 10 is good? And we got like some themes. So there's a lot of discussion about empathy being very important to us. There's a lot about attention to detail, transparency, and minimalism, like keeping things simple. And we formed 4 values as a result of those: be more human, strive to deliver, keep it simple, and love the details. And we've actually kept all of them for the last few years, and we've kind of fleshed them out over time. But each of those has related behaviors. We follow it very closely. So to give you some examples, in our all hands, which I had this morning, we have a Juro of the Week award, which is peer nominated based on values, right? So rather than just saying, this person's sold lots of stuff, it's here's a particular example of someone living a particular value. We also have done like very sort of minor stuff, like, we've created like custom emojis, like one emoji for each value. So when someone does a shout out in Slack, people respond with a value-based emoji as opposed to, the usual kind of rocket. I mean, it all seems like kind of very silly, right? But what it does, it makes things real.
It makes things real. And let me jump in here just to support you on this. Some people who are good fans of the Startups of London podcast perhaps know this, but the new people might not. And it's an excuse for me to tell this to you as well, Richard. This is an area of interest to me that's very dear and that I've spent a lot of time. How organizations work, how culture happens, and I do have a book about this as well. But the basic thing is, it comes down to 4 things. So what I did was I looked at sociology and how nations run, how religions use their structure, and how military is structured, and everything that runs on that we can say, okay, there is a certain culture around it. And when you boil it down, it comes down to 4 things: rituals, symbols, actions, and stories. So those are the 4 things. Those are the 4 pillars of building behavior in any kind of a group. And that emoji that you've custom built, it is such a significant thing because it acts as a symbol. And also you have the other 3, right? You have the actions, you have the stories, and then you need to have the rituals. I'm sure you do have the rituals as well. Give us one example, at least, like of a ritual that you do as a company that no other company does. Is there something like that?
I mean, there's quite a lot of things. I mean, Juro has a very specific culture, right? And it's
I'm curious now.
I mean, we talk. I mean, the all hands we had this morning. So we play music at the beginning of all hands. This is kind of a weird thing. So that's something we do every week. It's me for now. We haven't yet done peer nominated, but so we do things like that. As I say, we have this Juro of the Week award, which is kind of, again, tied back to those values. We celebrate milestones. So when people have, anniversaries at Juro, we have a very specific program of kind of gifts that you get and how we celebrate. We're having a all company offsite in Turkey in September, where there's just little things like this. I guess a part of the rituals. And then I think the other thing that's kind of interesting in the Slack world, right, which most of us are operating in, is having automations in Slack, just very little things, right? So like every Friday morning we have an automation that shows the whole company our annual recurring revenue in real time. Every Monday morning there's an automation which shows the status of our OKRs and our goals. I think just having this repetition is very, very important and healthy, because I think
that's the ritualistic aspect of it, right?
Exactly, it's repeated.
Amazing. I really do enjoy this conversation, but we do have a limited amount of time, and there are other questions that I want to have the opportunity to chat
Sure.
with you. You've, I think, implied a really important thing in the previous answer you gave, which is how we treat the employees that are within our companies, right? And I think there is a pretty outdated version of looking at it where it almost feels like employees have no choice but to work there. And that kind of a thinking shapes some of perhaps the older generation of managers approach their relationships within the company and what type of organizations these end up to be. However, making the organization a good place, it implies a certain choice that employees and our teammates have, right? They can either work there or they can quit and they can find another job. And I think that does make a lot of difference. Seeing people not as units that they have to work there and they have no choice, versus seeing them as people who have choice, who are there by their choice and who can choose not to be there. That kind of changes the approach and the conversations, I feel. What do you think about this?
I think that this is one of the most important things that I think startups are going through at the moment, right? Which is, Juro's been lucky in that we've got, 95%, headcount retention year on year, and we have like an employee NPS score, which is, it floats between the 80s and 90s. So we've kind of got stability there. But I think, a lot of companies are seeing a lot of headcount churn and kind of chaos. And I think you're absolutely right. People have a choice, especially if you hire well, right? So we try and hire only like really top performers who could just go and work anywhere they want, right? And they usually have multiple offers, and Juro has to convince them that this is a place that they want to work, and then we have to convince them to stay over time. So I think I see it as a relationship, right? We take a bet on an employee by hiring them, but they take a bet on joining our company, right? It's a bet, especially with a startup, because startups are high risk enterprises. They tend to be very hard work, etc. So I think, you can look at this strategically and tactically. Like strategically, we made this decision to be a people first company, right? And everyone makes that claim. Like very few founders say, hey, we're not people first, right? But we spend a lot of time sort of looking around at the company and saying, what are the reasons to believe that this claim of being people first is true? And there are a few things. So very specifically, in interview processes of 1 hour, we give candidates between 20 and 30 minutes to ask us questions. Why? Because it's not all about us, right? We're trying to have a two-way conversation to calibrate whether this is the right opportunity. I think similarly, when we look at employee documentation, we have this public handbook, which you kind of search for. But it's very deliberate and documented and thoughtful, and we have this fantastic people and talent team who kind of own it. And again, why? Well, it's because we don't take the premise that people are just lucky to have a job and work at Juro. We take the premise that the experience of working at Juro should be one of the memorable experiences of their career in all aspects: the work they do, the people they meet, how we operate. So I think you've got to do a lot of work there. It doesn't happen by accident, but certainly, from the top, you've got to have the right vision and attitudes. And if you get all that right, guess what? People actually want to stay, right? People want to turn up at work every day, and people do great work.
People are searching for meaning in what they do, and they're looking for great relationships. But they simply will not trade this if the business is like, if it's an abusive environment, if it's not paying well, of course it will not work. So there needs to be these hygiene factors first, all there. But on top of it, they really do look for places. It's amazing when they find them, and it does make them truly happier people. And I think, I don't know if you get this feeling as well, but it almost feels like not a commercial but entirely emotional thing. It makes you, I don't know, I really like the feeling of providing people with a certain workspace environment where they can act like themselves, are respected, find good opportunities, can feel vulnerable, and they're open to feedback, giving and receiving. So it feels like it's not just about money when those kind of environments are built, it's really a positive influence in people's lives, I feel.
I totally agree. I mean, I think, we're a contract automation platform, right? So we're not curing cancer. We're not doing good in the world in that way. But you could do great good in the world by just making, people's lives a little bit better, right? And given how much time people
Indeed.
spend at work, it can make a massive difference.
Yeah, yeah. My final question for you, is the time for building startups behind us, or the best time for building startups behind us, when you consider everything that's going on, with funding being more difficult to get, with the crises that are happening all around the world and in the UK, like with the pandemics and the Brexits and the stuff that doesn't seem to have an end, and also the fact that like the internet revolution has kickstarted and opened a very, very broad field that is like fertile ground for a lot of new startups and ideas, but perhaps it's more competitive now. Those low-hanging fruits seem to be taken. So what's your view on this? Is the time for building startups, is the best time for building startups behind us?
No, I think the best time is ahead of us. It's definitely true that we're going through a course correction here, right? But in my world, which is software as a service, we were seeing valuation multiples of 100 times ARR, which is great if you can do it, but it is pretty crazy when you think about how you can turn that into an exit opportunity that returns capital to your investors. So I think, we're returning back to 2019 levels of funding. And that's probably healthy, because it means we're thinking more about business fundamentals, which I think is kind of right. I think that the macroeconomic climate is certainly challenging, right? You have high inflation, you have crashes in the equity market, specifically in tech stocks. You have the war in Ukraine. There's a ton of crazy stuff going on, and to a certain extent, it seems that the world is collapsing. But the ability to grow sustainably should I think be the goal of startups, which is you want to build something that's not going to just build stuff to raise a Series C, right? You build stuff to have an impact over the long term. And so I think in these conditions and climate, it just means that founders have to think a little bit more deliberately about how to conserve cash, about how to invest wisely, and maybe just be more patient, right? It may not be a kind of get rich quick scheme, but over 5, 10, 20 years of a journey, you can have great impact. And I think the demand for online services still is growing hugely. I think 7,000 businesses last quarter were funded by venture capital funds. Maybe not quite at 2021 levels, but it's a lot of capital out there. And more importantly than that, there's a lot of people in the world with problems that you need to solve. And I think as long as there are problems, we'll have entrepreneurs innovating and delivering value for them.
Richard, thank you very much for joining in this chat. It was a pleasure. Like this conversation, it does really fill me with trust in Juro's future, and that it's going to be on a great trajectory with you at the helm.
Thank you for having me.